So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been on a tear lately, from unrolling her Green New Deal to outlining exactly what it will take to have the Democrats actually win back not only the White House, but also get the House back and also get the Senate back. Because let's be honest, the things that AOC and a lot of real progressives are calling for are, even though they may not be radical, in reality, they are radical as far as the centrist politicians who are in control are concerned. And so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does a great job basically letting the Democrats know, look, this is what it's going to take for you to win. And if you don't capitulate, then, sorry for you. Let's take a look.
What are you looking for in a presidential nominee this year?
Well, first, just corollary. I don't think I've created a political movement. I think I'm part of one.
Fair enough.
But I think in terms of what I look for, I think that it's really about the comprehensive understanding of this moment that we're in right now as a country and our ability to articulate it. And so I don't think that a 2020 nominee can afford to be bad on issues of race. Mm-hmm. I don't think they can afford to be bad on issues of economic justice either. I think.
How do you define economic justice, though?
So when we talk about things like the role of the labor movement, the role of labor in the working conditions of everyday Americans, when we talk about fighting doggedly for workers, for whether it's wages, whether it's union jobs, whether it's good jobs, I think that is what we're really talking about in terms of fighting for economic justice.
Are there specific red lines for you? Medicare for all, do you have to say you'll do it, or is aspiring to it in the future enough for you?
So I think that we need commitments with teeth. So I don't want to be placated as a progressive. And I know that the progressive movement does not want to be placated in 2020. It's like,
but they'd love Medicare for all, but they're like, it's not realistic. Let's fix Obamacare, or let's do Medicare 50, Medicare 55. Would that be a non-starter for you?
For me, I reject that outright. I reject the rationale. Okay. I reject the rationale of saying adopting the same insurance models or a similar insurance model to any other developed country in America is unrealistic. I reject that. I reject the idea that single payer is impossible. I reject the idea that universal health care is impossible. All of these things are possible. When we talk about what I want in a 2020 candidate, I want a 2020 candidate that says we can do these things. We can be audacious. I think we need, in order to overcome this moment, we need to return to our FDR roots as a party.
First of all, I don't think I could really have put that any better myself. I know people always make fun of her because she's very nice. She's very bubbly. She's very positive. And for some people, they don't like that. I'm not exactly sure why. There are probably some reasons why societally and condition-wise, but I don't want to go into that right now. But she does just a fantastic job of really laying out what the Democrats need to do to win. And it seems to me that considering she won an election that she wasn't supposed to win, considering she raised money that she should have really never been able to raise, only from individual donations, and furthermore, considering that she's getting legislation right now pushed in the Green New Deal, by the way, not on this committee, not on the Climate Change Select Committee. Now, she got apparently asked to be on that committee, but she had already committed to the financial committee that she just said, I want to be able to focus mostly on my job. But climate change is such an important thing for her that she went ahead and took on this particular challenge because it is very important. So she, not even on that committee, just got into Congress, and she's pushing one of the most revolutionary legislations that we've seen promoted thus far, even got an endorsement from Jill Stein on Twitter. So that lets you know that the legislation, when it becomes a bill, finally, it may not be absolutely 100% perfect, but it's going to be a major step. And for those of you who don't know the difference between a bill and a resolution, because there are some people saying this isn't comprehensive enough. And I don't know if you know this about resolutions. Resolutions are not bills. A resolution is basically a commitment to make a decision about what we're going to do going forward It establishes a game plan, but it is not the execution of said game plan. The bill would actually be the execution of that game plan. So that is what a resolution is. And people kind of misuse and interchange the words bill and resolution, and they shouldn't, because that's why people get confused. But a resolution is not a bill. It does not have the powers of a bill. So just want to be clear on that. It is still important, though. However, it is still important because what it shows is how much support a bill would actually get, and it once again lays out the framework for a bill whenever you're crafting it and pushing it through the House and the Senate. So she clearly knows what she is doing, right? Whoopi Goldberg told AOC, well, maybe you should spend some time in Congress, sit back and watch, blah, blah, blah. I'm not an advocate of that at all. Maybe, maybe because we're millennials, we're hard-headed. But that whole sit back and watch thing, especially coming from somebody like a Whoopi Goldberg, who was the total opposite of that. She refused to do that. It sit back and watch means you need to be quiet and let the players play, and be happy that you are where you are. And AOC is not that. And she basically is saying, that is how I won. That is how Bernie Sanders almost beat Hillary Clinton and would have if the election wasn't rigged. That is how Tim Canova basically beat Debbie Wasserman Schultz and would be sitting in her seat right now if the election was not rigged. But you can only rig so many elections, and it's even harder to rig them in red states, which is why, what a surprise, Bernie Sanders was so successful, which is something we're going to talk about in a second. But the fact that she directly addresses the idea of, well, single payer is unaffordable. I'm not even an economics guru, but I personally know 3 or 4 different ways in which single payer could be executed, and it would be phenomenally better than any other country that is already doing it well. And that's a fact. So when AOC says, I reject that idea, it's because the facts back up her point. There are countries with far less resources that don't have a Wall Street, for example. They don't have the corporations that we have. They don't have the GDP that we have. And surprisingly enough, they do fantastic. In fact, many would argue, and rightfully so, that us not having single payer is actually costing us more money every year. It is. Especially when you couple that with the idea that our economy is broken and the middle class is being, basically severed at the spine. It doesn't exist anymore. The income inequality is horrific right now. So a lot of the people accruing these bills that oftentimes comes from being overworked, that oftentimes comes from, they get exacerbated by not being able to have access to the medication. So when they finally do decide to go, to be able to be seen, a lot of the times you have to go to the emergency room. Why? Because you haven't paid off your deductible. If you haven't paid off your deductible, you can't schedule a doctor's appointment, or you can schedule maybe the first doctor's appointment, but they're going to be like, look, you haven't paid your deductible, so we can't schedule this doctor's appointment. And now, because that's just how great medical insurance companies are, now you have deductibles on your medicine. So you have to pay about $7, sometimes $8, sometimes $900, sometimes $1,000 on your medication before they will finally begin to cover it and allow you to pay co-pays instead. If you can't pay for your medication, you're probably going to get sick, right? Because you're poor. And if you're poor, you can't pay for your medication, you're going to get sick. You can't afford to go see a doctor. You're probably going to go to the emergency room. These bills aren't getting paid. Straight up. I can tell you for a fact. Most of these emergency room bills are not getting paid. It's just a reality. You can look it up. Like any doctor's office will tell you that. Any hospital will tell you that. Oftentimes they don't get paid. It adds up. Eventually, people will, they just make the decision. It isn't worth it. I'd just rather die than have this amount of debt on me and have your life frozen in place. These are important issues to people because there are more of us than there are of the 1%. That's why we're called the 99%. I love the fact that she said that we will not be placated, that progressives will not be placated. Because in my opinion, she's pointing fingers. Obviously, she called out Sherrod Brown, but she's pointing fingers without actually pointing fingers. She basically said, Kamala Harris, you're not just going to say what you want to say and think we're going to believe you. She said there has to be teeth in these policies. Lay out a plan. Bernie Sanders laid out his a while ago. He has a whole institute called the Sanders Institute dedicated to his plans, to be 100% honest with you. So the Cory Bookers of the world are going to have the same problems. The Elizabeth Warrens of the world, who are now pretending that she's loved Medicare for all and the idea of Medicare for all forever. You can't stand up whenever, Trump applauds capitalism and decrees socialism or decrees that America will never be a socialist country. Furthermore, we are a socialist country. All right. We give all of our money to the top 1%. We do redistribute funds. We just redistribute it out of the pockets of the 99% and make sure that the government, where all of the power is centered at right now, then transfer that money and gives it to the 1%. That is a different form of socialism. It's socialism in reverse. We already have socialism, but they don't want to call it that. They call it capitalism. But Bernie Sanders has already dedicated his life to coming with a plan to make sure this works. But the Elizabeth Warrens of the world who clap for capitalism have not done so. She's claimed she's always been for Medicare for all, but I've not seen any significant steps taken by her, any advocacy by her to see this come into fruition. She didn't wag her finger at Obamacare. She championed it. So AOC, once again, is right. We will not be placated anymore. It's not happening. Clearly, if you need more evidence, look at what happened in 2016. Now, I also want to play for you all this short clip regarding what policies and what competitors could be successful in the general election.
Basically saying, hey, it is easy to be a Democratic socialist in a blue district like yours. It is hard to say that same thing and get a Democrat elected in Missouri. So how do you square that with the ability of finding a governing majority?
Well, I square it, first of all, with the direct evidence in 2016 that is not true. And no matter how you feel about Senator Bernie Sanders, he ran in 2016 as a Democratic socialist.
Unapologetically.
Unapologetically, and he won every county in West Virginia. And he won Michigan.
Primaries.
In primaries,
I mean, these are among Democrats.
Obviously,
I know that. But that's the point. Among Democrats is one thing, but those independents, right? Those.
And he wins independence. He wins independence. That's the thing. It's because people have this mistaken idea that American politics is on one linear line between left and right. 40% of the American public identifies as independents, and that doesn't mean we're in the middle.
Right.
That means we hate this thing.
Now, clearly, Chuck Todd has not done his homework, and AOC did. So funny when people call her stupid. They try to call her insane. They can never tell you why. Because you can't argue with numbers or you can't argue with facts, and AOC has gotten very good at using both of those. Because she is absolutely correct. Bernie Sanders won West Virginia. Bernie Sanders, if you don't know, is wildly popular in West Virginia. In case you didn't know, he's wildly popular in Michigan. Michigan is actually one of the most popular Green Party states as well. They had a lot of success there. And it's because these policies speak to them. Now, I do want to say one thing. It's interesting, and maybe he's just doing his job as a good interviewer. I don't think so. I think he was trying to basically trap her, but once again, did her homework. It's interesting how Democrats and those who align with establishment Democrats are all of a sudden curious as to how they can win red states with some of the rhetoric they use in the general election or the primary election. At the same time, they have been basically hitching their wagon to the idea that if we black out Kamala Harris and pretend like she's with it, then it doesn't matter when we get to the general election, because then what's going to happen is that they're going to try and hit her with it's basically in politics. There is the use of the central limit theorem, and it's a statistical thing, it's a scientific thing, but also it is used in political theory a lot. And the idea is, because of the distribution of quote unquote ideology across the country, that in order to win, politicians will naturally or unnaturally move towards the middle in order to basically win over both sides. See, here's a huge problem with the central limit theorem, and it's like as it's currently being applied in modern political dialogue and modern political theory. The problem is they don't know what the country's ideology is because they haven't actually been trying to figure it out. Because before, they were much better at gauging what the people wanted. They were much better at telling people also what they wanted. Now they're trying to tell us one thing, but we know how to research, so we know different things. And we've all gained a consensus on certain issues like anti-war, right? Like single-payer health care, like election justice, things like that. And those are just a few. Oh, also making sure that billionaires are taxed proportionally and fairly, and making sure that they're held accountable. Lower tax on the middle class. These things are now mainstream. However, they are trying to push them to the background. But let's be once again. See, but honestly, I want to be very honest. Race, unfortunately, is not a dominant issue as much as Democrats want to believe. Because, I won't say it's not a dominant issue. It's a dominant issue, but not in the way we want to think. Race can lose you the general election. It can win you the primary. But just focusing on race will lose you the general. There's a reason that Obama didn't bring it up often. Now, you can talk about things that will benefit minorities, but if you think that you're going to be able to run an empty campaign and just talk about race just in the most vain way possible, like Kamala Harris has tried to do, like Hillary Clinton tried to do with her gender, same thing, then it's not going to work. So it's interesting to me, once again, that the Democrats all of a sudden are care about what would work in the primary and what wouldn't work in the primary, because, in fact, AOC seems to have a better grip. Bernie Sanders and those policies, populist policies, are much more popular with the general crowd than the Democratic crowd. Literally, no, if anybody will tell you this, the people's choices were clearly Bernie Sanders. Okay, Bernie Sanders got cheated. Fine, I'm voting for Donald Trump. Oh. There's a whole psyche behind that, mostly just the idea of Trump being anti-establishment, which proven to be untrue. But that's the truth. Bernie knew something that a lot of other people didn't. And that's because he lives in a place like Vermont where they can seemingly vote blue every single time. They can vote for it. Burlington is 99% renewable energy. It's like run by water. Burlington, Vermont, right now. Legalize marijuana, legalize gay marriage. But if you've ever met people from Vermont, they're actually conservative as hell. Many Vermontarians, whatever they are, they're conservative. But certain things affect all of us. Bernie Sanders is aware of that. AOC is aware of that. And so really, AOC is putting him on game. Because this idea has been manufactured that progressive populist policies are not popular, when they are. By every legitimate, measurable poll, they are. They are. I mean, you can say, oh, it's socialism, it's communism, but nope, they're popular. Medicare for all is wildly popular. Holding banks accountable, holding banks accountable, of course. Taxing the 1% fairly turned out to be way more popular than Fox News had bargained for when they put out their poll. These are popular ideas. And if the Democrats want to win in 2020, they maybe should take a gander at the current most popular politician in the nation. There is a reason for it. Remember how hard they came after Bernie Sanders for being a populist? You know, they created this idea, you know, Bernie Sanders is a communist. Bernie Sanders is a communist. He's a communist. He's an old dumbass. He doesn't understand politics. He doesn't understand economics. And weirdly enough, mind you, Bernie was an economics guy. That's what he did. That's where his bread was buttered in college. AOC was. Interesting how both of the economists see how not only popular but possible these ideas are. And also most of the country agrees with them. Maybe MSNBC and the Democratic establishment should start listening to the outsiders and realize that they're not actually outsiders. They're speaking from the people, for the people, because they spoke with the people. We've made it very clear about what we want. It's really at this point just a matter of whether or not the establishment is going to be willing to give it to us. But it looks like if they aren't willing to give it to us, they can kiss 2020 goodbye. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. You can donate to our Patreon and keep helping the network grow by clicking on the link in the description below. And also, make sure you join us at JustNForm.com. And finally, make sure you subscribe to us on Roku and be part of the very first independent news network on Roku TV. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.